This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand, and we've finally cracked the big one. We've got it for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have the real story behind the drones. The thousands of drones that have lit up the night sky of New Jersey, because where else would you go if you're in an alien armada planning to invade Earth? We've actually got an expert who knows what's going on. Also, we're going to get to the bottom of this nuclear fiasco that has literally almost gone nuclear. Well, it hasn't literally gone nuclear, otherwise we'd all be dead. And how many flags should a political leader stand in front of when they're giving a press conference? You thought you were suffering through a cost of living crisis. You had no idea what the real issues are facing this country. All that and more coming up. Now, first up this week, I want to get to the nuclear debate because obviously the future of our entire species depends on whether or not we transition to net zero emissions by the year 2050. I'm not one to question the science. I just do what I'm told. Thank you very much. But Peter Dutton reckons that he can get there, or at least get a serious chunk of the way there, via his nuclear program. And this, of course, is his plan to fire up 7 nuclear reactors, which is to say build 7 nuclear reactors, which is to say get permission to build 7 nuclear reactors, which is to say get his own premiers to agree to lift their ban on said nuclear reactors in their respective states, let alone all the Labor premiers. And then, of course, get them all moving and emitting zero emissions energy. So this is a fairly ambitious plan, to say the least. But Peter Dutton did finally release his costings of this program, and it came in, surprise, surprise, below the cost of Labor's renewable energy program. Or did it? Well, let's go through just a few of the round numbers. We'll keep it nice and simple so everyone can get their heads around it. Peter Dutton says that his nuclear program will cost around $330 billion. Sounds like a lot of bananas, doesn't it? But he says that Labor's renewable energy program, which is all solar and wind, will cost about $600 billion. Now, that is obviously a pretty significant saving. It's a bit over 40% less than what Labor is saying that its renewable energy program is going to cost. But here is the first catch, which is that is not what Labor is saying its renewable energy program is going to cost. That's what the coalition is saying Labor's renewable energy program is going to cost. So this is the first issue with the costings. It's not comparing the coalition's own costings of the coalition's policy, or the costings that it commissioned Frontier Economics to do. It is not comparing the coalition's costings of its policy with Labor's costings of its policy. It's comparing the coalition's costings of the coalition's policy with the coalition's costings of Labor policy. Are you keeping up? Right, so that is the first thing. And this is where things get really fun, because the coalition is using an outfit called Frontier Economics to do its costings, and that's great. People use different outfits to do modelling and costings all the time. And you can basically determine what outcomes you are going to get by what inputs you put into the modelling, what inputs you put into the costings. You can say, right, but what if they had to build twice as many transmission lines as they are saying they're going to build? Or what if, do this or that? And you can slice it or dice it. As they say, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And then, of course, there's modelling. So you can sort of get whatever you want, but you're usually going to go for a modeller or commission modelling or determine the parameters of modelling that obviously best suits you, best suits your model, best suits your policy, and best suits the position that you want to create. So if you want someone to say that nuclear is more cheap than renewables, chances are you'll be able to find a modeller and some modelling that says that, and likewise vice versa, which is why both sides are saying, no, mine's cheaper, no, mine's cheaper, no, mine's cheaper, here's the data, no, mine's cheaper, here's the data, here's the modelling, here's the research, here's the costings. So that's just politics. That's just normal. But the point is that the coalition is not comparing what it says its program is going to cost with what Labor says its program is going to cost. It's costing both of them with its own guys. And of course, it comes out cheaper. But there's another twist in the tail, because Frontier Economics is the same firm that the coalition commissioned to cost Labor's policies, same program, a month earlier in November, just before it released its nuclear costings. And Frontier Economics cost Labor's program at something like 5 times what Labor said it was going to be. I think Labor said it was going to be about $120 billion. And they said, oh, no. It's going to be $650 billion, which is a lot more. I'm just an art student, but even I know that is a lot more. But now with the revised figures of Frontier Economics that compares Labor's policy to the newly released coalition policy, they're saying that Labor's policy will only cost $600 billion. A bit under, in fact. I think 590 something. Well, what's a few billion between friends? But that is about $50 billion cheaper than what they said Labor's policy was going to cost just a month earlier. So again, this gives you an idea of how sort of, I won't say rubbery, but how malleable, how fluid such modelling can be. So Labor somehow, by doing absolutely nothing, has just managed to save $50 billion by just sitting there with its own policy, which it says is 20% of that anyway, while suddenly the costs that the other lot are projecting on it have just suddenly come down. Just got $50 billion in the pocket. Not a bad result for a month's worth. So that is just the first 2 things you need to know about the costings. One, that it's the coalition's costings compared to what the coalition says that Labor is going to cost, not the coalition's costings compared to Labor's costings. And secondly, what the coalition says that Labor's is going to cost has already come down by $50 billion in a month. This is just wild stuff. This is great. I feel rich just talking about it. I wish my mortgage worked like that. But the third thing is that the coalition isn't actually going to build as much electricity or generate as much electricity with what it builds as Labor is planning to. So you have AEMO, which is the Australian Energy Market Operator. And look, I'm doing my best to make this sexy for you here, okay? You've got AEMO says that they're going to need something like, I don't know, whatever it is, 400 terawatt hours or something. No one understands what it is anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But the point is that the coalition's plan is actually going to build enough infrastructure, nuclear, plus, they're going to have renewables as well, wind and solar, all in the mix, right? And, good on them. If nuclear works out, I have no problem with it whatsoever. But all the stuff combined that they are going to build is actually going to produce a bit over 40% less power than Labor's plan. And therefore will cost a bit over 40% less than Labor's plan by its own reckoning. So even by its own guys, even if we trust completely that its own guys are completely right about what it's going to cost for all the things that they're going to build versus all the things that Labor is going to build, theirs is a bit over 40% cheaper for a bit over 40% less electricity, which again kind of makes it a line ball. And one of the ways that this was explained was exactly the way that I explained Peter Dutton's nuclear policy on this podcast, for this podcast, all those months ago when it was first announced, which was on a whiteboard. Except this time it was the actual Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, scribbling on a whiteboard, explaining it, instead of me scribbling on a whiteboard, explaining it. And his handwriting was a little bit better. But anyway, that is the real story on nuclear costings, everything you need to know. Now just go and switch the lights on and enjoy your sun lamp. Now, another big move that Peter Dutton came up with in the last week or so was that he was not going to feature any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander flags in any public appearances that he does, which he hasn't been doing for ages. And so this was obviously a sort of set up Q&A, a bit of a Dorothy Dixer on my beloved friend Peter Credlin's Sky News show. And she asked him about the fact that he just stands in front of Australian flags instead of other members of Parliament or the government who stand behind or in front of the Australian flag with the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag. And Peter Dutton says, no, I only stand in front of the Australian flag because otherwise it's divisive to have too many, all these other flags. We're one nation, we're one Australia, we have one flag. That's it, right? Now, this is great. This is good. I'm not bashing Peter Dutton here. This is good red meat for his base. This gets people fired up and they think, yes, you can almost hear them standing, putting their hands on their chest and singing the national anthem. It's terrific stuff. It's also very clever because what he wants to do is drag Labor into a culture war where it argues that no, you should have the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags at all public appearances alongside the Australian flag because we're an inclusive nation and we're paying our respects or whatever. That's what he wants to do. He wants to get the PM or whoever else to come in and say, no, this is why we have to have Aboriginal flags here. This is why we have to have the Torres Strait Islander flag there. And then they can have an argument about how many flags they have at these public appearances and what they are. Fortunately for the Labor Party, it did not take the bait. And I must admit, you'd sort of hold your breath sometimes because you can guarantee there would have been a few lefties there saying, this is terrible, we have to go and fight for the Torres Strait Islander flag. But no, what they have done is simply say, oh, Peter Dutton, here he is in the middle of a cost of living crisis where people can't afford to pay the rent, to pay their mortgage, to put food on the table. And he's trying to start a culture war about flags. He's banging on about flags. What's this guy going on about? Why is he talking about flags? And so a few people in the party have said this could be just a little bit of hope, a little bit of a silver lining, a few green shoots that Dutton may have just slightly over-egged, slightly gone just a bit too Trumpy on this one. And I must admit, if he had dragged the Labor Party into that debate that he wanted, then he would have been hailed as a political genius. But because Labor, thankfully, didn't take the bait and said, no, it's you that's having this irrelevant culture war argument with yourself while we're focused on cost of living issues, bread and butter issues. He's kind of played himself out of the debate just a little bit. So again, the answer to the question, how many flags should a political leader have behind them in the middle of a cost of living crisis? It doesn't matter. Well, it's the biggest story in the world right now, but no one actually seems to know what the story actually is. These are all these drone sightings that have been seen in America, or we think they've been seen. We don't know what they are, especially around New Jersey. There are all sorts of theories about what these things are, whether they come from Iran, whether they come from outer space, whether they come from the US government itself in some kind of secret undercover operation, except it's not really undercover. It's right there everywhere in the night sky. So to help get to the bottom of this, I thought I would bring in someone who is an expert in these kinds of matters. He's a veteran pilot of more than 60 years. He's flown for the Air Force. He has flown for Emirates. He's flown giant 777s. He's flown Airbuses. He's flown fighter jets. He is an aviation expert who has also helped to plot the suspected resting place of MH370. So when it comes to an aviation mystery, there is no one more qualified to get to the bottom of it. Captain Byron Bailey, welcome to The Real Story. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Joe. Thank you.
Firstly, what was your initial reaction when you started seeing and reading about these reports of drones in the night sky above America appearing in their thousands, if some reports are to be believed?
Well, it was just weird. I mean, I thought someone was having a laugh, really, but then when you look in the paper, everyone was confused. And even Trump initially was suggesting perhaps they should shoot them down, but
that's right.
he's changed that.
That's right. I think Trump came out and said that the government needs to explain exactly what they are right now, otherwise people should just start shooting. That was his official position.
He's actually said we know where they come from and we know where they're going. But, all these conspiracy theories, there's been some real lulus. The Iranians supposedly had a mothership
That's right,
sitting off the
coast. That's
and
right.
these were little spy ones that hovering over. Why New Jersey? I don't know. There's nothing about
Maybe they want
there.
to play a round of golf at Donald Trump's golf.
Someone else suggested that because the Ukrainians are gifted their 80 nuclear weapons back in 91, guarantee for security.
That was
from
a doozy,
America,
wasn't it?
And one is missing. And the only way they can detect where it is to detect gamma radiation from the plutonium. So they suggest that these fleets of drones, low level with gamma ray detection, trying to find the location of this missing bomb.
And again, this is a real, it sounds, we're both laughing as you say that, but this is actually a real theory that has been posited online by a drone manufacturer, I believe, or a drone sort of expert who's saying that this is happening. So firstly, you say that we now know where they come from or where they're going or whatever. What do you think? You've got impeccable sources in the United States Air Force who you've been speaking to. What are these drones? Where did they come from?
Well, a few years back, NASA set up a group of companies to investigate its advancement of technology in air mobility.
Right.
And so it involves the military, it involves civilian, and basically they've set up some low-level air traffic routes below 1,000 feet because light aircraft, for example, are not allowed below 1,500 feet.
Gotcha.
So it's never going to conflict with any air traffic control, and they stay away from the major airports, supposedly. And the idea is these various, call them drones if you like, but they're actually unpiloted vehicles, airborne vehicles. And what they've been doing is practicing unpiloted airway flights from A to B, air taxi, and it's all evolving technology. And eventually, because it's so advanced in what they're doing, and I guess there's a little bit of artificial intelligence and everything's pre-programmed, you don't need pilots. And as Elon Musk said, the next generation fighter, by the way, will be unpiloted. So come 2050, when they retire the F-35s, goodbye to fighter pilots.
Wow, there is so much in that. So let's go back to the beginning. Firstly, what is the difference between a drone and an unpiloted aircraft vehicle? Or is there a technical difference?
A drone is just a general term for something that doesn't have a pilot in it.
Right.
12 years ago, I was flying a private jet from Europe down to Kathmandu for a rich guy.
Yep.
We overflew Hindu Kush. Meant we had to cross northeast Afghanistan. American air traffic controls, military guys.
Yep.
I happened to look down as I was at low 30s, and I looked down, and at about 30,000 feet was one of those really big UAVs loitering there. And the thing is, the technology, and that's, quite old technology now, but it'll be out of sight up there, but someone can sort of see what you're having in your coffee if they really want.
So that's an unpiloted air vehicle.
Yeah, it's unpiloted. So what's happened now, we got all these little ones that range from like large insects, with the little propellers and so on. And it's just evolving. And what's happened with the war in Ukraine, where now they're the largest producer of what's called drones in the world. They have factories punching out these little things. They strap a little bomb on it. They go and find a $5 million tank, and it's got a hatch open, and bing, goodbye to a tank. So tanks, like fighter pilots, are actually heading for the dustbin of history.
So these drones or UAVs, unpiloted air vehicles, are everywhere, and people just wouldn't have been familiar with them and realised that they were actually being...
Well, there's actually 1 million registered what you call drones in America. Here, you have to, if you buy one over a certain size, you've got to actually have it registered, and you've got to be approved to operate it. So there are height limits. You're not allowed 800 feet, I think, is the maximum, and so many miles within. So there's an awful lot of going on, and air traffic control were very worried initially, but it's working out okay.
So these were private companies, were they, that NASA had set up, and they were basically testing air traffic corridors for what? I mean, are these a new
highways
pizza
in the
delivery
sky.
services?
They have about 4 dedicated ones that go from Langley Air Force Base, it's Delaware to Virginia, and they're flying at night. But when they see the lights, they're compliant. The lighting is compliant with the federal aviation regulations for light aircraft. But they're under 1,000 feet. And of
so
course,
this is having the red light on one side and the green light on the other, and a little flashing...
a white tail.
Yep.
But if it's a bigger one, then you have 2 white tail.
Because other experts have said, if these were from outer space or if these were from Iran, it's passing strange because they are complying exactly with
Federal
aviation regulations.
Yeah.
So it's NASA operated, but private entities who are mapping out these kind of new air highways.
That's the way America works, Silicon Valley and all those. It's the smart young guys that step in and they, very like Elon Musk, they come up with new stuff. And of course, you don't want to advertise it. The military knows what's going on, and when they're asked, they kind of shrug, well, we don't really know, but they do. I mean, and the governments, well, I'm not sure who you want to tell in the government anyway, because some talk too much and some don't talk at all.
So the people you've spoken to in the US Air Force, that they're saying this is definitely what it is, or that they're saying we think this is what it is?
Well, he wasn't. It's a colleague, retired lieutenant colonel. He cannot say for sure, but we're pretty sure it is that.
Right.
Because everything fits in that they've been testing this. And over Langley Air Force Base a year ago, they were testing some of these drones. But now they're testing unpiloted from A to B, just to make sure it all works before it actually, one day, I guess, a couple of years' time, we'll have a full
when we're all driving flying cars.
Air taxi service. Yeah. And the fact they don't have a pilot probably means it's safer because 95% of plane crashes are a result of a pilot error, making a mistake. And
so when people say the things that they've been seeing in the sky, there's drones the size of school buses, they could be actual school buses, the actual buses of the future, the actual transports of the future.
Well, there's so many different actual types of drones, and the ones they prefer now for air taxi, actually a fixed wing, with tilt rotors, so you can take off vertically and then it transitions, like the Bell X-22 Marine chopper that they tactical airlift they use up north.
Or the old Harrier jump jet, although that's a jet, not a rotor, but still.
Yeah, very,
so completely different.
Very similar.
But you don't need you don't have to take off. You don't need to.
And the beauty is these things with the program and the computers, they can just be so accurate and smooth and bring themselves in. Pilot, he could have a bad day, but they never have a bad day.
They're never tired.
No, and I just remember auto lands in the Boeing 777, how the airplane did such beautiful work, and I just wished I could have done it as good as that.
If only I could live up to that machine. So another thing that I've heard raised is that if these drones were really as big as people are saying, and some are saying, size of a bus, some are saying the size of a 2-car garage, that sort of thing, that they would be much, much louder. They'd be making much more noise. Is that necessarily so, or can they be quiet? Or are they just really far away?
Well, now, even fighters now, the exhaust is shielded.
Right.
So in terms of detection, for example, on fighters, you want thermal shielding. You want stealth, so no radar, no thermal, no noise.
Yep.
And it's pretty easy with the modern sort of, and of course they wouldn't be flying fast.
Right.
And we're looking more, I guess, military and civil, but it's more like eventually we're going to have an air taxi set up that'll go from A to B.
And that could potentially be quite quiet.
Yeah, and they'll be probably at about 800 feet, avoiding all the actual and air traffic, the real stuff with pilots in it. And for me, coming into Bankstown on the private jet I'm flying, the most hazardous thing we do is trying to avoid the light aircraft. Some interesting moments at Bankstown,
If this is what is happening, why wouldn't NASA or the government or these companies say, no, it's all right, everybody, we're not being invaded by aliens, we're just doing this little test run, we're just doing,
Well, you don't want China and Russia to start sort of taking a close interest, whatever you're doing. This is evolving technology. It's advanced stuff. And, you just got to sort of keep it quiet until, look at Area 51. They denied it existed for years.
While I've got you, does Area 51 exist?
Oh, it sure does.
But there's no aliens in it. Or are there?
That was a weather balloon.
That was a weather balloon.
Yeah.
Right. But the US government actually initially denied there was even an Area 51.
That's correct. Because that was their top secret centre. They used to, when they're doing all the stuff on developing the SR-71, the super spy plane that used to do all the very high-speed Mach 3.5 over Russia and all that, they knew when the Russian and the Chinese satellites were going overhead, so they would actually sort of pull the aircraft into the hangar.
Yeah.
But what they didn't realise was the heat signature on the ground where the aeroplane, there'd be a shadow, thermal shadow. And so the Russians and the Chinese worked out the actual shape of the SR-71 just from the shadow, from the fact that there'd been a shade when the aircraft was sitting there. So they'd whip it in the hangar too late.
So when, in other words, when you're doing something like this, when you're doing something experimental with cutting edge technology, there is so much focus on you by source. They know that the Chinese are watching, they know that the Russians are watching, and so they figure it's better just to say absolutely nothing.
Absolutely.
Get their heads spinning where they don't know what it is and think, oh my God, what are the Americans up to?
Yeah. Well, 6 years ago, me and some other colleagues, old former fighter pilots, were called back for pitch black to fly Learjets to fill in as fodder for, the big exercises going on, 110 fighter aircraft. We'd be tied up with as part of a strike package, and 20 of us with a mythical airfield in the middle between Darwin and Tyndall, and I was operating as part of the group out of Tyndall, and we were Blue Force and they were Orange Force, and one day we would attack, and I got shot down every time, of course. But the interesting thing was the guy was always 100 miles away when he was claiming a kill on me.
Shot you. That's right. Just take my word for it. I got you. I got you, Byron.
But we always knew when various satellites were going to come overhead, so all transmissions, everything ceased. All phones, by the way, were left behind and turned off and locked away. So, it's all about stopping the Chinese and the Russians from eavesdropping on anything, because the technology that's coming out all the time is just amazing.
That is amazing. So I suppose us mere mortals, us mere civilians don't appreciate just how ultra cautious, ultra paranoid operations like this have to be, even if they are ultimately for a commercial purpose. The technology is so cutting edge that they can't afford to.
Yeah, well, it's combined military and civilian. So that's America, the way it operates. But there's a lot of good stuff.
It's a military-industrial complex, isn't it?
That is exactly right, yeah.
That's right. So, of course, these things could have commercial applications. They could have military applications.
Yes.
They don't even probably know themselves yet, but they are just seeing what they can do, what works, whether you can have. And again, I'm imagining, air traffic corridors. We've heard about, pilotless drones or vehicles, moving, as you say, taxis through the air, moving people, moving cargo, delivering goods.
It is, yeah.
And obviously to be able to do that, you have to have some kind of orderly thoroughfare, and that is what these people are sort of doing. They're mapping out these kind of air highways between major
companies like
centers.
Amazon are delivering stuff. It's easy enough to program accurately something that can fly to a certain spot and down and drop it off and come back. No pilot involvement. It's easy enough for some geek on a computer to put in all the accurate coordinates, and this stuff is so accurate and precise.
So why would this be happening all at once? Is this just an exercise that they had planned and to see, how many they can have moving at the same time without banging into each other, and this just happens to be the time that they did it? Or is it something where maybe someone's just seen one thing and then everyone starts suddenly looking up at the sky where they weren't before and suddenly they're seeing them everywhere and it's a combined effect? Or is it just sort of one mass operation that just happens to be taking place right now in New Jersey in the lead up to Christmas?
Last year they were working on it, and now they're really trying it out. But the technology is evolving at a fantastic rate, and artificial intelligence getting involved. I mean, it's a brave new world out there.
Certainly is.
Yeah.
Captain Byron Bailey, thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story. That is absolutely fascinating.
Anytime, Joe. My pleasure.
And that is all we have time for this week. Your welcome, world, for me unraveling the greatest mystery on the planet. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave us a review. Leave us a rating. Obviously, only if you really like the show. And why wouldn't you? You're a person of immaculate taste and you're already listening to it. So rate a little star, write a little review. And also you can get in touch with us if you want us to look into anything, any other mysteries you need solved. Just email us at therealstory@novapodcast.com.au, or you can follow me on Instagram, and that's at Joe_Hildebrand. Slide into my DMs. And of course you can read me in all the News Corp mastheads around the country every Monday and every Saturday. Have a very, very happy Christmas, and we'll be back next week with a very special guest. You won't want to miss that.